Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Hamlee. The premise was well-meaning. The creation of a juvenile court that would be therapeutic in nature, run by specially trained public servants, with a benevolent judge whose mission was to help children and families. It was an alternative to adult court for children in trouble with the law. Turns out the court was not benevolent to all children and families, and according to our guest today, has never reached its mission. Up next on Another View, how abolishing family court could bring justice to children and families today. But first, it's that time of year, you know it is, time to support what you love. WHRV-FM and Another View. AV producer Lisa Godley and phone producer Dr. Barry Graham are here to tell us why becoming a member of WHRO Public Media is a great investment. Why is it a great investment, y'all?
Because you don't get this kind of programming anywhere else but right here on WHRV, and we love bringing it to you. But this is your opportunity to support what you love, so pick up the phone and give us a call.
800-940-7170. That's the number to call to make your pledge of support. If you call during this hour, we have a $2,000 match, so we will match your donation dollar for dollar up to $2,000. So let's make those phones ring, because the Another View family always comes through, don't they, Barry?
Absolutely. Time and time again, we hear from the folks who enjoy this program. In fact, I was just listening to Todd Holcomb inside Pledge Central during 1A, and Todd was talking about this program getting ready to come up. He said, it's just one of my favorites. Barbara, since I've become affiliated more closely with the program here, people just continuously talking to me in the community. Let me tell you about something I heard on Another View, to which I usually have to reply, I was there. Okay, but it's one of those programs that generates so much conversation and so much good inside the community.
Absolutely. 1-800-940. Oh, is that the right number? 7170. That's it. I always get confused when we're talking about pledge and then the show number. So we are talking about the pledge number right now. 1-800-940-7170. I want to read an excerpt from a letter that we received from Another View to talk about some of the impact that we've been having, Lisa and Barry. So this comes from one of our members here, and the person wrote, "Thank you for what you do for us, especially for those of us with sadly limited exposure to the African American culture. I'm ashamed to admit this, but I had a very white view of one of the first Another View shows many years ago. The topic was focused on hairstyling for African American women. I remember thinking, oh, for goodness sake, stop wasting my time and focus on something of substance so that I can learn. I felt very disappointed, but simultaneously found myself questioning why you picked such a seemingly superficial topic. The more I sat with my own questioning and replayed some of the discussion in my head, the more I realized how much I had learned about the other and how ignorant I had been. It was truly another view for me. I am a white African immigrant to the USA from apartheid-era South Africa, so your show and the current dynamics of American society are interesting to me from yet another view. Something that stands out for me when I hear your show is what I believe is a unique African gift, a particular kind of laughter that has the ability to soften the edges of difficult discussions without dismissing any gravitas. The banter and laughter that I hear on your show reminds me so much of shows from South Africa. I'm grateful for this flavor of my homeland right here in Virginia. All that to say thank you and keep doing the good work that you are doing for our community, with thanks and love to you and your crew." I just think that is just so indicative of what our listeners tell us all the time in terms of what they get from Another View. Same thing for you, Lisa?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People want to talk about it all the time, and they're happy to say what they've learned listening to the show, and they otherwise would not know it. I've often heard the fly on the wall. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a fly on the wall to conversations that I might otherwise not be privy to all the time.
And, Barry, I think people don't realize we have a very diverse staff, don't we?
Yes, we do. We really are. It is a very multicultural effort here, and it is. I want to throw this in, Barbara, and this is from the most sincerest part of me. It is a labor of love. We all love working on this program, and we love the message. We love the conversations. It's just true. It's truly just a wonderful experience to be a part of, and the listeners can be a part of it too.
Absolutely, and we hope that we get lots of calls today because we have a very important topic that we're going to be talking about in just a few minutes. But now is the time to make that call of support. 800-940-7170. Your gift will be matched dollar for dollar up to $2,000 if you call, as long as we're on the air. So give us a call now, 1-800-940-7170. Or if you're listening online, just go to whro.org and click donate, and you can become a member that way. Another View is coming up soon in just a few minutes, and stay tuned because you'll be really interested in today's topic.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamley. We are in our spring membership drive, and we welcome you to become a member of our public media family. If you join this hour, you are saying with your treasures that you appreciate Another View and you want us to stay on the air. Call 800-940-7170 and make your pledge of support now. Or you can go to whrv.org and pledge online. Either way, if you call within this hour, we have a $2,000 match, so your donation will be matched dollar for dollar up to $2,000. So make that call now. I am blessed that I have never been to family court. But millions of families have, and the outcomes are not always positive, especially for Black and Indigenous children, at least according to our guest today. Jane Spinak, author of The End of Family Court, joins us to tell us why this form of justice should be abolished. Hi, Jane. How are you?
Hi, Barbara. I'm well, and I loved listening to you read that letter during the drive.
Oh.
What a wonderful appreciation of your show.
Absolutely. And I tell you, it warmed my heart when we received it. So thank you. And I know you're in New York, and so you are a public media person, a part of the public media family. So we thank you for that, even though your donations aren't here. So, Jane, let's start with the terminology, because family court has many different names, and I want to make sure our listeners understand exactly which court we're talking about. So could you tell us some of the other names, and then also what kinds of issues are heard in family court today?
Sure. Mm-hmm. So the original court was called juvenile court, and it was started at the beginning of the 20th century. As you said, it was to treat children differently than adults, but it was also to intervene in families' lives, particularly poor and immigrant families, in order to fix them, maybe make them into more of, quote, Americans that the reformers who started the court wanted it to be. Over the course of the century, the court has had many names. It's sometimes called juvenile court, domestic relations court, children's court. I put that all under a category of family court.
Okay.
But my book particularly looks at the kinds of cases when the state intervenes in family life. So people know that as child welfare or child protection, something I now call family regulation, and some of my colleagues call family policing. And also still when young people get into trouble, either they are charged with delinquency, or also there is a category that young people get charged with called status offenses. And that's when they haven't broken the law, but because they're under 18, they can still be brought to court for misbehaving. There are, of course, other kinds of cases in court, and many people are familiar with cases having to do with custody or support or visitation, those kinds of issues as well.
So, Jane, you didn't write this book simply as a researcher. I mean, you are literally in the system, right?
That's correct. I both practice in this system in New York. I have, over the course of my career, I've represented children, young youth, and parents in this system. I taught for 40 years at Columbia Law School, where I taught and supervised my students to do work in family court. So I am very steeped in the practice, and also have spent many years working on reform efforts.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the beginning, because I tell you, when I was reading your book and I read, about this benevolent judge and these public servants and so forth, and that they would be given basically carte blanche to determine how a family should live from an African American perspective, I was like, right. That's not going to happen. So I know it started out for immigrants, as you said earlier, to kind of Americanize them.
Right.
But as the court really started to gain its footing, I mean, how did they even select the judges? How did they make a determination as to who was qualified to decide whether someone's family life was appropriate or not?
Well, I'd like to say there was a good test and these judges passed it, but I'm afraid that's not the answer. As you said, the court began dealing with the flood of immigrants at the beginning of the 20th century. And it's important to understand that these immigrants were mostly from Southern and Eastern Europe, and they looked very different and sounded very different than the earlier white settlers. And so those settlers were very interested in turning them into what they thought were proper Americans and changing the way that they lived. Of course, these immigrants were overwhelmingly poor. As the court moved west and south, and as during the 20th century, Black Americans moved north in particular, not surprisingly, the court began to disproportionately intervene in the lives of those families. And I think it's important also for your listeners to understand that how racialized the approach to the immigrants had been, because they saw them as really the other, and that racialized approach simply got incorporated into and was part of how society looked at Black families and Black children. Unfortunately, the idea of the court being therapeutic and trying to be problem solving and trying to help, quote, fix families almost always devolved into some form of punishment rather than therapeutic intervention. And so the idea that this was going to work as a therapeutic kind of intervention.
Mm-hmm.
It quickly became clear that if that kind of intervention didn't work, punishment was the next step.
So, what types of ways, therapeutic ways, were immigrant families, as opposed to African American families, for example? What kinds of ways were used to fix the child, if you will, versus the punitive way that a lot of Black families found themselves in?
Well, let me clarify.
Okay.
Most of the immigrant families also experienced this court as punitive and interventionist and telling them how to live. But unfortunately, as in every other aspect of our society, when the state intervenes in the lives of families, the disproportionality and the disparate impact on Black families later, when indigenous families became Native American families, kind of shifted from the federal control to state control. They too were disproportionately brought into the court system. And I think it's also important to recognize that this is a court for poor people, overwhelmingly. So many reformers through the 20th century kept saying, if people of means were brought into this court would disappear.
Because people of means would use their own resources to help correct the child or make the change.
Absolutely. And for me, Barbara, the most, I don't want to use the word surprising, I think I should say shocking idea was that as I dug into the history, what I found was the court was founded in 1899. As early as the 1910s, even supporters of the court were starting to identify that the court didn't work and that most of what families needed to be found in their communities. And over the course of the first half of the 20th century, there were reports after reports after reports, some done by the courts themselves, saying, we are bringing not only poor families in that we are having a hard time, quote, helping, but we are, and they didn't use these words, these are more modern terms, but they were basically saying we are bringing in Black families who need the resources in the community even more because these communities are segregated, because they are not getting the same services, they don't have the same schools, the employment opportunities. So things that we say today about what's wrong with this court, there were people saying in 1914, in 1926, in 1934. This is what we're saying today is exactly what was being said then.
So, Jane, for people who have never experienced the court system, I mean, honestly, I'm blessed. The only thing I've ever been to court for was a traffic violation. So,
right.
And that's totally different from what we're talking about. Give us an idea of some types of cases that would be brought before family court. So, because like you talked about the status offender before, who is not a criminal. I mean, did not commit a crime, but yet they were in court. What would be going on in their lives to get them there?
Well, in the beginning of the court, there was no distinction between young people who were alleged to commit a crime and young people who were just misbehaving. So what's misbehaving? Not listening to your parents, maybe having underage sex, maybe getting drunk, maybe not going to school, or being disruptive in school. These things are not the basis for bringing adults into court unless it's a specific law. But for the most part, this is just a way to control young people. Mm-hmm. And the part of the problem with it is that bringing them into court, which sometimes their parents did because they didn't have anywhere else to turn. Mm. When you said earlier, people with means can do this themselves, it's true. You know, if you have a family that's available, or if you have the resources to find treatment for your child or to deal with a learning disability, then, you know, you may never have to turn to a court system for help. Mm. But many parents do because those resources are not available. Also, schools report on children, and law enforcement, if they pick up a kid because they've broken curfew, they all end up in this system where the court is supposed to make a difference, and essentially the court has not. The difference that the court makes is often these young people end up further in the juvenile legal system. It's almost like a training ground. So instead of getting what they need, they find themselves in a system where they're heavily surveilled and investigated. And so any slip up, and of course we know that in both schools and law enforcement generally are paying attention to poorer neighborhoods, to neighborhoods of color in a way that they're not paying attention to many other neighborhoods. So not surprisingly, those are the children who are identified as needing to come to court. You know, I talk in the book about a report that some judges participated in a project to keep young people out of court for status offenses. And one of the judges says, I got into a lot of trouble as a kid. I didn't get arrested for these things and brought to court, but he recognized he was a white kid in a white suburb and nobody was paying attention to the same
type
behavior
of offense,
as is being paid attention to in other neighborhoods.
So what would the court do with the child that came in with the status offense? I mean, was there a fine? Did they take him away and put him in foster care?
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, for most of the 20th century, really until the last few decades, they could do the same thing to a child who is misbehaving but not breaking the law as a child who is found to break the law. So they could be put on probation. They could be put in foster care. They could be put into institutions that we know today are no better than prisons. Only today, there are many states that do not allow status offenders to be locked up. But there are still some states that do. And those states actually give up federal funding that says, if you lock kids up, we aren't going to give you this federal funding. They still don't take the funding, and so that they can lock young people up. So it's, it is, for many of these young people, it doesn't feel very different than it does for a young person who now has been found to commit a crime and gets a punishment.
Yeah. there. 757-440-2665. That's the number to call to join our conversation. 757-440-2665. Give us a call if you've had experience in family court. What would you think about abolishing the court and doing something different? And we are going to be talking with our guest about some alternatives, but I'd love to hear from you and your experiences. 757-440-2665. Give us a call when you can. Jane, you talked about in some of the readings that I did on about the book, and also some of your previous interviews, that even this court could be considered part of the school to prison pipeline.
Right.
Can you explain that?
Sure. There are unfortunately many school districts that when a young person is truant, or maybe they get into a fight in school, or they're somehow disruptive and they get suspended or they get expelled, very often they will be referred to court for even in one district, they had to serve their suspension in juvenile detention. So it is another way in which young people kind of begin to penetrate into this carceral system that we have, and where, for the most part, what we should be doing is figuring out, why is this young person truant? Or what is the reason why somebody got into an argument with someone else in school? Young people always do that. That's just part of adolescence. But for those who are, routinely getting into more trouble, what we need to be doing is figuring out why. And what does this young person need, so that they don't find themselves entering into a system that is likely to push them more into actually understanding, okay, how does this system work? And gee, I learned something about committing crimes that I wouldn't have learned about if I hadn't been found myself. Right. But also, I think that we haven't talked about the child protection services yet, and I hope we will, because that's another way in which young people may find themselves in court because their parents are charged with neglecting them because they're having difficulty in school. And that's only one aspect of child protection, the so-called child protection system that affects, so many millions of children every year.
So, and I do want to talk about Child Protective Service, because one of the things that you brought up also was the whole idea of the reporting, and that has been abused is what I got from the reading.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think your listeners will be very surprised to hear, for example, in 2019, there were something like 4 million reports to state child protective services hotlines about over 8 million children. And those numbers are astounding. But what's more astounding to me is that there are a couple things. One is, by the time they are 18, 1 in 3 children in this country will have a report made, and 1 in 2 Black children will have a report made.
Wait. Say that again. 1 in 2 will have a
Black
child.
children, by the time they reach the age of 18, will have had a hotline call about them. And 1 in 3 of all children in this country. So maybe I can talk a little bit about how dysfunctional that is.
Oh, my goodness.
Most people think that the story that hits the headlines about, some terrible tragedy about a child is what those reports are about. But in fact, only about 20% of these millions of reports are about either physical abuse, sexual abuse, or extreme neglect, like not feeding your child or not getting essential medical care that puts the child's life at risk. The rest of that 80% is about what is called neglect, but it is not neglect. It is poverty and structural inequality. And there is so much research that has established that. So all these mandated reporters, and people know, the teacher's supposed to call in, the doctor's supposed to call in if they're worried about, has this child been neglected or abused? But some of those calls are just screened out entirely. Some of those calls are harassment calls. Some states allow anonymous reporting, so people use it as a harassment tool. And then even the ones that are screened in and require an investigation, most of those investigations, 60, 70, 80% of those investigations don't result in a petition to court and don't result in the family getting whatever services maybe the person who called up thought they needed. So basic services like food and the right benefits and, getting their housing fixed because they have a landlord who is not, removing the asbestos or the lead.
Right.
Things that poor families, and disproportionately poor families of color, deal with all the time. But the mechanism we use, instead of providing those supports in the community, is to send these families through this system that is terribly disruptive, even if a case never gets to court. Wow. To be investigated, to most states it takes about 2 months to do an investigation, and child protective workers might show up in the middle of the night. They might tell you they have to strip search your child. They may tell you they got to go through your cabinet. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible experience for the parents and for the children. And as I said, most of these investigations don't even result in any kind of petition against the parent.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about family and juvenile justice with Jane Spinak, author of The End of Family Court. We'll get back to our conversation in just a moment. But first, let's check in with Lisa Godley and Dr. Barry Graham to see how we're doing with our pledge drive. Hi, guys. How we doing?
Hi, Barbara. We've raised about $400 in terms of trying to meet that $2,000 match.
Oh, my goodness. Come on, another of you listeners. Y'all need to get busy. What's going on?
The clock becomes our enemy, so let's go.
Absolutely. 757 800-940-7170. That's the number to call to become a member of WHRV and show your support of Another View. If you are a listener and you listen to us every single week and you're not a member, we really want you to come join our family, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
One of y'all.
Well, I mean, we were speechless because, of course, that's the obvious. Of course, we want you to become a part of the public radio family. In fact, if you're willing to contribute $100, you can get a pair of tickets to go and see Jessie Montgomery with the Virginia Arts Festival. She will be here on May 16th at the Robert Hickson Theater at 7:30 p.m. there. And wow, Lisa, I mean, it just sounds like a phenomenal concert.
Absolutely. She is fresh off her 2024 Grammy win for Best Contemporary Classical Composition. She is just amazing. She's an acclaimed composer, violinist, educator, and she interweaves all this with classical music, poetry, vernacular music, and social consciousness. Now, her work has been described as turbulent, wildly colorful, and exploding with life by the Washington Post. So we are very, very honored to have her coming here.
Absolutely. That's for $100 pledge. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
That's right.
Okay, and that'll get us a long way towards our $2,000 goal. Come on, y'all. Y'all are making me nervous.
We don't want to
here.
leave that money on the
We
table.
don't want to leave that money
not.
on the table. We absolutely do not. Become a member of WHRV, WHRO Public Media, because we've got so much to offer, in addition to Another View. But we are really appealing to those of you who love our show, who come up to me and to Lisa and to Barry and all the rest of our crew and tell us how much you enjoy it and how much you learn and so forth. Isn't that worth a small investment? At whatever amount you can afford? That's the thing. Become a sustainer. I believe most of us are sustainers that are on our crew. All of us are members. And so if we give and we work here, then we really need you all to give because you're listening. And being a sustainer means that you tell us an amount to deduct from your checking account or from your credit card each month. And we will continue to do that until you tell us to stop. So that way it helps us to know where the money, is coming in every month. You don't have to worry about, is it time to renew? Isn't it time to renew? You will listen to this show differently if you become a member. 800-940-7170. That is the number to call. If you are enjoying today's show, then show that love by becoming a member and help us meet this $2,000 match that we have going on. Lisa, I'll let you have the last word before we go back to our show.
You think about all the moments where you hear things that you otherwise would not hear or hadn't heard. I was having that moment and looking at the clock as a producer going, oh man, we got to go to a break right now. And I was so into the conversation that was happening just a few minutes ago. So I'm excited about that continuing. But if you love Another View and you love the things you learn and the things you hear, this is your opportunity to support what you love. So pick up the phone and give us a call.
Absolutely.
800-940-7170. Let's go back to our conversation. We're talking with Jane Spinak, author of The End of Family Court. Jane, people are freaking out about the statistic that you gave us about 1 in 2 Black children by the time they turn 18 will have had some sort of experience with Child Protective Services.
Right. It's an astounding number. And it really shows how, and as I said, most of them won't end up going to court or being, or their parent actually being found to neglect or abuse them. But the disruption of being investigated, I can't understate it enough. It is such a disruptive experience for so many families. And part of what researchers have found is that parents become afraid to reach out to people that they want to trust, whether it's their doctor or a teacher in school or somebody in childcare, because all of these people are, quote, mandated reporters. There's a law saying if they are worried that a child is being abused or neglected, they need to call into this hotline. And so, fortunately, there is some movement today, mostly because parents have now become more organized and they have become activists particularly on the state and local level, to really share what a terrible impact this system has had on them and why it needs to change and why we need to think differently about how to support families. The mantra is support, don't report. How do we support families in their communities in ways that they will, again, turn to people who can assist them, who can help them figure out what they need, whether it's mental health services or substance use services or just, help because of what their landlord is doing or making sure they have childcare so they can get to work. Basic needs that we all have are too often a basis for saying, oh, well, maybe this parent is not taking care of their child, when in fact it's society who is not taking care of their child.
757-440-2665. Give us a call if you'd like to join this conversation. We're honored to have retired Judge Eileen Olds, who was a judge in the juvenile court system. Hello, Judge Olds. How are you?
Good afternoon. And Barbara, I always enjoy listening to another view, but today I've just been on the edge of my seat because this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I called in because I wanted to try to comment or clear up the Virginia perspective. Well, first of all, and Jane, like I said, I'm really enjoying this, but in Virginia, we are known as the juvenile and domestic relations court. And the idea is, of course, one court addressing or consolidation of related family matters, whether that involves juvenile delinquency or even criminal activity among family members, and then the other things you mentioned, child support, custody, and so forth. Mm-hmm. But my real call was to address the status offense situation here, and I think what you speak to well is what those of us, and I did this for 24 years, and I'm now recalled, so I still sit. Actually, I sat in court yesterday. But it's just the evolution of family or juvenile court, meaning, as you said in the beginning, and I'm not talking so much about the cultural aspect, but, it was pretty much known as kiddie court. You only saw the things, and even when I began, it was like that in many ways. You only saw the truant behavior, the mischief. Okay. But for those listening, in Virginia, status offenses are actual criminal offenses. They're low level. But the short way to say it is, and you touched on this, but they're crimes that if they were committed, if those same acts were committed by adults, they would not be criminal, but it's because of the status of the child's age. So what comes to mind and what might clear this up some is things like possession of tobacco. Obviously, an adult can have tobacco or alcohol or curfew violations, or the one that I guess is very low level, but it still has consequences, is violation of passenger restrictions in automobiles. So a bunch of adults can climb into a car and leave a football game, that's fine, but not a bunch of juveniles. So I just wanted to, I guess, put a little more.
So, Judge Olds, let me ask you a question then. If the status offenses here in Virginia are also criminal offenses, then if someone comes before your court and they are, I guess, convicted, and tell me if I'm using the wrong terminology, so they have a record?
Well, they have a record for that offense. Now, it's not a class one. It's not like a more serious charge. But yes, that's the point. The police will see children out, and this is how it normally happens. Curfew violation. They're out at 7-Eleven or some place in the middle of the night getting something to eat, but it's beyond curfew. They're they're going to get cited for that, and they'll have to come to court and answer for that. So, yes, there is a court proceeding and there is a finding. I'll use that word as opposed to conviction.
Okay.
But it does show. We also have there was a mention of parents, wanting some help for a child who, maybe it's just not acting right or is gotten out of control. We have here in Virginia what we call a CHIN, a Child in Need of Services petition, and oftentimes that will get services without, again, that whole CPS, Child Protective Services realm. But there is such a thing. It's kind of a gray area, but we do have petitions occasionally for children in need of services. Last thing I'll say, so I don't hog this program, but the in Virginia, the reporting to CPS is anonymous. I heard you say some states it is. It absolutely is here. So you're right. Calls can come in all day long, and the identity of the person making the allegation is not revealed to the people who are being investigated.
Thank you, Judge Oles, for listening, first of all. And secondly, for calling in.
Thank you.
We appreciate you. So, I'm sorry. Jane, you want to respond?
Yeah, no, thank you, Judge. I'm not aware of how every single state works. But I do, it is, I think, unfortunate that young people can be prosecuted for issues that are really not criminal. They are things that all young people do. We know that adolescents are different than adults, and we know that their brains are not fully formed and that they take riskier behavior. They do things in groups. That's typical adolescent behavior. And what I think we need to be able to do is channel that into, productive areas that they want to be in, right? Spaces that they want to be in, things that they want to do, supports that they're willing voluntarily to take, so that you don't have to bring a young person through a court system in order to get services that lots of young people need, but not all of them can afford to get them in the way that some can.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Kalusha in Newport News.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara, for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, originally I'm from Africa. And in Africa, neighbors take care of neighbors. And here in Virginia, one time they called me that I left the kid alone in the car. While I was right there on my car, talking on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
And I waste energy and money just go to court, try to fight this. It was just like really, really bad experience. That was just the point that I was trying to. And no one loved my kid more than myself. But it was just a bad experience.
Yeah.
And, I just tried to bring that point. Yeah.
Are your kids still with you?
Now they're in college. One is in Virginia. He goes to Virginia Tech. So I'm a good dad.
Okay.
I'm a good dad. Yeah.
Okay, I got you.
One is Virginia Tech. I have two now in high school. But that experience almost threw me off the rail. It was a really bad one. And it was just like somebody with bad motive called cops on me.
Yeah.
It just disturbed my life for almost 4 weeks.
Wow. Kalusha, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I appreciate you calling in and telling us your story. Jane, the psychological impact is something that people really don't even look at when you are faced with having to go to court, especially, as he just said, I love my kids. His kids are doing well. But
yeah. Well, I think there are a couple things. His experience is the experience of those millions of families who get investigated but don't end up ultimately
Sure.
in court. So we have to ask ourselves, why would you? I mean, the judge said you have anonymous reporting. I
Yeah.
think that's the first thing that has to go. You have to identify yourself. It doesn't mean that identification gets passed on to the person you're calling about, but it does allow the state then to determine, is this a valid call? But secondly, he said in Africa, neighbors take care of neighbors.
Yeah.
Let me say that part of the history that sometimes doesn't get told and is really true today as well is that Black families have always been taking care of each other. The kinship within that Black community. I've read a lot of historical reports, and that's including a White House report from 1930, in which one of the reporters made that point that if Black families, because they traditionally, while enslaved, had to help each other, but that tradition has continued. And so if we could support the community, because neighbors do want to help neighbors. And so, it is another reason to say, why are we pushing people as individuals into court systems as opposed to taking that enormous amount of money and investing in communities so people within communities can support each other.
So, Jane, we've got about 5 minutes left. And talk to me about how you would see this abolition happening. So how would we transition from family court to something else?
Right. So I think it's important to understand that for me, abolition is a mindset.
Okay.
It means, how do we change a system with non-reformist reforms? That is, reforms that don't strengthen the system as it is, but change it so that parts of it may not ever even be necessary. I would abolish status offenses as an example, but I think for child protection, family regulation, it's narrowing the front door to the court. It's saying, let's think about the best ways to shift resources into communities so people don't get reported. The examples we've already talked about, which is like not allowing anonymous reporting, would just cut out like 25% of the reports that come in. Changing the way in which people who are considered mandated reporters understand their role, which is not to just pick up the phone and call, but first to actually see how they can help. And to do that, you really have to say, we're not going to hold you liable for not calling. What we're going to do is strengthen your ability to make connections for those families that you think need some assistance. And we're not going to stop you from calling in when you see serious neglect or abuse or sexual abuse. Of course, we want you to call, but we don't want you to think that everything that happens needs a call. Last thing, if I have a moment, we really need to strengthen, while the court is shrinking, we need to strengthen the due process rights of parents and young people when they come to court. In New York, we have had a revolution, really, in representation. Parents now get what's called holistic representation, which means that there's a peer parent advocate along with a lawyer and a social worker to try to figure out what does this family need so these children don't have to go into foster care or they can get home more quickly. And it's working because lawyers actually require evidence to be before the court. And many courts do not have that kind of, it's not enough of a legal court. It's too much of this traditional idea of, oh, the judge and the probation officer will solve the problem. So that will make a tremendous difference too.
Is there enough money for the community type, the programs you're talking about within the community? In other words, as the court shrinks, we need to push the money to the communities then?
Right. We spend $17 billion a year on out-of-home care for children.
Wow.
$17 billion. And many of these children will end up going home anyway. So let's figure out how to shift that $17 billion a year into communities so that people don't have to be in court in order to get what they need. And of course, many of the families don't end up getting what they need. So yes, it's, people say it's money, but it's not. It's thinking differently about how we spend the money.
Jane Spinak, she's the author of The End of Family Court, How Abolishing the Court Brings Justice to Children and Families. Thank you so much, Jane. We really appreciate you being on the show with us today.
Thank you, Barbara, and I hope your listeners pledge.
I know. Thank you very much. We appreciate that. And speaking of pledging, Lisa, can you give us an update?
Yes, Barbara, I can.
That sounds good.
It does. We have raised in this hour $7,898.
Thank you, our Another View listeners. We love you. We love you. We love you. Thank you.
Very much.
Very much so. That is fantastic. Those of you who have not had a chance to dial in because you were so engrossed in listening to the show, you still have time. 800-940-7170. And Lisa, I think there's a special gift or of appreciation.
Yeah, well, we were talking earlier about the Jesse Montgomery concert for a one-time gift of $100. There are tickets for a concert, and she is just amazing. Yeah. So if you would love to hear just this incredible African-American composer, she just does some phenomenal work, and she's just so sought after for all that she does and how she combines classical music and contemporary. She's just phenomenal, and she will be here on Wednesday, May 8th in Williamsburg. And wait a minute, wrong one. She will be here Thursday, May 16th at 7:30 at the Robin Hickson Theater. Okay, that's in Norfolk.
In Norfolk,
I do know
right.
that.
Yes, it is. Thank you all so much for giving. We truly, truly appreciate it. And we also thank you for the pleasure of your time today with us here on Another View. Now, you can listen to this show again, or you can share it with a friend by visiting anotherviewradio.org and getting the podcast. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. A very, very, very special thank you to all who became members of WHRO Public Media today, or you renewed your sustainership, or you gave just because you love listening to the show. We truly, truly appreciate you. There's still time to make your pledge of support. Just go to WHRV.org or pick up the phone and dial 800-940-7170. 800-940-7170. And when you call, be sure to tell the volunteer that you're calling in support of Another View. Next week, Dr. Keith Newby joins us with Another View on Health. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Hamlee. Thanks so much for your support of Another View. You still have time to join our family at 800-940-7170. We'll get together again next Thursday at noon. for another view.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.